Welcome, everyone. This is Brian Smith with the Who's Next Football Recruiting Podcast. This episode is going to feature one primary focus, and that would be who and when will UCF get to the level they need numbers-wise with offensive line recruiting. This is a very difficult situation to project as the transfer portal makes things much more difficult than it ever has before. Offensive line recruiting is complex because out of all the positions on a roster, offensive line, generally speaking, has the most players. I mean, there's 5 positions along an offensive line. UCF, however, has some issues to deal with based on how the last staff recruited, and this staff now has to pick up the pieces from that and try to figure it out. As I sit here and look at my other monitor from my other computer, this is a roster that is very top-heavy in terms of offensive linemen being either in their junior or senior year in 2021. Looking at it, I would say that at minimum, they're going to lose 4 or 5 guys. You always have a transfer, somebody could get hurt, etc. With that, the following premise is the problem. You need 3 or 4 offensive linemen at minimum in each recruiting class. Over the course of the last 2 recruiting classes combined, UCF has only signed 5 offensive linemen. So they are definitely behind the 8 ball in terms of numbers once you move to class of 22, 23, etc., unless they really, really do something with transfers. Again, that's the magic elixir, potentially speaking. So with that said, a couple of things to discuss first. Number one, you can only control what you control. Gus Malzahn and his staff arrived this spring. They've done what they've done. They've gotten 2 really good football players to join the program that are committed, and that is Kittler and that is also Maldonado. First young man's from the Dallas area. The other one is from not that far from UCF in Lakeland, Florida. Now, Kittler is going to play inside. He's most likely going to be a center at some point. He could play guard. He can really move. I like his film a lot. But the other young man, Maldonado, is a basketball kid that's moved over to play football. And quite frankly, I think his upside is through the roof. It's up to him. He has to develop the maturity and all the things you have to do in terms of film study, etc., to become a great player. But Maldonado is certainly a prospect that has physical gifts that could get him all the way to the NFL level. Then again, offensive line is one of those positions that is extremely difficult to project. So again, that's going to be more about him than anybody that is coaching at UCF. So with that, that's 2 players. Now, normally in this situation, I would say you have to take 6 offensive linemen, even though that I'm talking about high school kids. With the transfer portal and the junior college ranks, this is where it gets murky. At minimum, in my opinion, you have to take 4 offensive linemen from the high school ranks and at least 1 transfer and at least 1 JUCO kid. That's kind of how I look at it. Now, those 2 things could go either way. You may not take any transfers and you take 2 JUCOs. If you get 2 studs, that's great. That's not likely. It's very hard to project that. And a lot of the junior college kids went to junior college, not because they wanted to, but because they had academic or off the field issues, if not both. So there's a little more of a high risk. With a kid that you take as a grad transfer, 1 year, possibly 2, depends on the young man. Remember last year, because of COVID, the NCAA is granting anyone that was a part of college football last season an extra year. So if you were going to be a senior in 2021, you actually get a quote-unquote extra year so you can play next year as well. So if a kid was a junior last year, this would be a senior, and then he could, if he had redshirted at some point, he could play in 22 and 23. It's complex. So every kid, every situation is different, and it makes it really difficult for Gus Malzahn, Coach Hand, who's the offensive line coach, and everybody else associated, even the defensive coaches. It matters because if you're not winning up front on the offensive line, that impacts practice. The defensive linemen don't get the same look. And, of course, it impacts the scoreboard, bottom line. And that's where you win. You got to have more points than the opponent. That does not change. So I'm going to go on the record and say 3 guys would be too short. 4 would be about right, but you have to take a couple other kids as transfers. There's also one other possibility, and I have no idea. I'm not speculating on this in terms of a specific name. Position changes. There can always be a player that's a tight end that moves over, a walk-on that develops and does something. You just don't know. I can remember back to the early 90s, the Dallas Cowboys took Mark Tuinei. He played defensive line at Hawaii. They brought him in. They flipped him he learned to play offensive line, and he started for Super Bowl teams. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Offensive line is, again, very complex. As far as players, I actually interviewed Leighton Nelson, the high school prospect out of Boone High School in Orlando yesterday. He was at the Varsity Sports Network Orlando Media Day in Orlando at the Amway Center. It was a great event, by the way. I really enjoyed it. But the thing about him is he doesn't honestly know where he's going. He's taken visits to Pitt, to Miami, UCF, Louisville, and one other school. But really, I think the main focus here is Florida or UCF. And he didn't take an official to Florida. I don't know if they didn't offer him as early, but Leighton's recruitment was a little bit unusual. The following stat, in all the years that I've covered recruiting and followed, even back when I was in high school and around 1990, 1991, I don't know if I've ever heard this before. I said, when did you get your first offer? Common question. Leighton said, I believe it was January 22nd. He got his first offer. I said, this year? And he said, yeah. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And he said, yeah, then I got 18 offers in 22 days. So whatever happened, I don't know if his film wasn't circulating. I don't know what it is. That is absolutely bananas to me, because usually kids, they have a pretty good idea where they stand by the end of their junior year. November, December, they'll start getting offers. Even offensive linemen, again, it's more difficult to grade the film. It's much more difficult. But to go all that way and then end up being a national recruit, Utah was the other school. Utah, Florida, UCF, Louisville. I mean, he's all over the place with his offers. Oregon offered. Go from none in December to 22 of them, or 22 days and having 18 of them. It just shows you how complex offensive line recruiting is. Offensive tackle in particular, that is a premium position. Can't have enough of them. It's just like the guys they line up against. Defensive ends. Can't have enough of them. They change the game, good or bad, anytime the ball is snapped. If you make a critical error at left tackle, for instance, for most teams, although UCF, Dylan Gabriel's a lefty, so it would be more the right tackle, the blind side of the quarterback, your whole season can go down the drain just like that. You know, he injures his shoulder or breaks a rib or something because he takes a really severe hit that he did not see, and there you go. That's why guys like Nelson are really important. Since I'm talking about him, here's the transformation for him and why JUCO kids, transfers, etc. It's so difficult. Leighton was about 6'5", 240. He showed me a photo. And I'm like, holy cow. I mean, he didn't even look remotely like a Division I player when he was a sophomore. And in fact, he didn't even start until the Oak Ridge game in the middle of his sophomore year. Then he was pretty dominant last year as a junior. Then, of course, again, he got all the offers this January in the spring of his junior season. Now, the question becomes, how do you project him? Is he a right tackle? Is he a left tackle? He prefers left, but he's okay with either one. But with him and Maldonado, I'm telling you now, that's an athlete. Putting those two, you could play them together. You could play Nelson at left guard just to be really nasty at one spot and play power football once in a while, or line him up, or Maldonado play tight end. You could do all kinds of stuff if you got them together, because those are two big-time players. That's when you can change your roster. It's still not the numbers that you want. And again, they need at least 2 or 3 more guys in this offensive line class. However they do it, JUCO, transfer, grad transfer, you name a guy that is a walk-on, builds himself into being good enough, whatever it is. They don't have enough numbers. 5 kids in 2 years is just dismal, absolutely dismal in terms of numbers for offensive linemen. I don't care what O-line coach you talk to, they're going to tell you that. You need about 15 on a roster. That being said, Nelson gives you position flexibility. You don't want to do this, but if you have to, it is what it is. He can play either tackle spot, and he's gifted enough. He could play guard if you needed him to, and so could Maldonado in a pinch. You're going to start him at tackle because that's, it's the harder position because you're taking on edge rushers. That doesn't mean they can't cross-train in case you miss, or even if you don't miss, so you have more options, and you have guys that are able to make plays and learn chemistry with one another, even though they might change it up once in a while. How much Coach Hand does this, I don't know. I haven't had the opportunity to really speak with them about it, but I do know the following. If they're going to get a couple more kids in this class, and one of them is Nelson, it gives you a lot more room for error. I will be very surprised if not one, if possibly even both of these young men hit, meaning they're going to be major contributors at the college level. Nelson's film is good. He really understands zone. His scheme in high school is not that far different for what they're going to run this year compared to what UCF does. A lot of zone step and whatnot. And I'm not going to get into technicalities. I'm certainly not an O-line coach, but it's a lot of horizontal movement, and it's about athleticism. And this is a young man that is quite athletic. So using him as the parameter, since I just spoke with him, UCF needs a couple more guys to come in. They're in the Leighton Nelson mold just for position flexibility. Forget just, okay, I'm going to be a dominant right guard, left tackle, whatever. They're going to be short numbers, and they're certainly going to be short experience. I'm sitting here looking at the depth chart. They're going to lose their right tackle. They're going to lose their left guard. And you know what? They could lose somebody else as well that starts. And there's always the chance of injury. You just don't know. It's very, very complex. Of course, transfer portal is a disaster in college football as it is anyway. Maybe a kid gets dismayed with something that happens at school and doesn't like the academics there. Who knows? And leaves. Any little thing now, once you're behind, matters. So the only thing I want to say to wrap this up, if you're going to go forward, you got to get somebody that comes in with what they've already got. Even if they get Nelson, they can play right away. I think it's at least one, if not two guys that are JUCO or a grad transfer. UCF has a good class going, but to win at this level, you need numbers. You can't have big gaps. Now, again, Coach Malzahn, Coach Hand, Coach Kenny, all the guys that are on the offensive side, it's not their fault. This is what they inherited. They signed the pen to paper, and they're making a lot of money. It's their job to figure it out. That being said, O-line are built, by and large, a heck of a lot more often than they are born, because it's technique, and it's technique, and they just keep repeating that word, and that's reps. So next year it's going to be very interesting. But this year they've got a pretty experienced group. They've got some talent, and I think that they're going to be able to run the ball pretty well, and they certainly have running backs. They're very good. I've talked a lot about that on Inside the Nights, but there's just no doubt there's going to be a big transition coming up, and that's what recruiting is about. And I love recruiting. I am fascinated to see what they're going to try to do. I know they just offered a couple of JUCO kids, but getting them on campus, signing them, etc., I don't know. Junior college kids usually aren't very easy to get a hold of and interview anyway, but I'm looking forward to figuring it out, because this is going to be critical, not only for this recruiting class, but how it impacts recruiting classes down the line. So for all the different things that come out, O-line is about as important once you get behind, because it takes longer to develop. We really need to figure it out in this class. It's not like running back where you can put in a great athlete and he can at least be serviceable right away. O-line don't usually jump in and play. They just don't. So Brian Smith for Inside the Nights and the Who's Next Football Recruiting Podcast. I've got 3 articles that I already put up on the site today. There's going to be some more interviews from the Varsity Sports Network Media Day. And I've got a couple of things coming up in regards to what I think about depth charts and whatnot with UCF. So everybody have a great evening. Thank you very much.